go ahead and play. It's about a 2-minute soundbite of an interview that is not fully dropped yet of Matt Rhule. So you're getting kind of a sneak peek here, ladies and gentlemen. Him talking about trying to maintain elite standards throughout what he even called mediocre success up to this point. Go ahead and roll that there, Jake.
When you've got a room full of people who have won championships or been part of championship teams, they know what it feels like. They know when it is how it's supposed to be, when it's not how it's supposed to be. The level of competition in practice, the intensity of practice, they've been around it. When you've got players or coaches who haven't necessarily been there, and you're trying to explain to them it doesn't look the way it should yet, even though you feel like you're on the right track, I'll know when we get there. Like, what's that conversation like?
It's hard, man. It's hard to take the practice thing. So I had a player come up to me at the end of this year, great young man on our team. And he's been there for a couple of years. He's like, Coach, you got here and we started doing mat drills. And we started tackling in practice. We started doing all these things. And we were all like, wow, we never worked this hard. We're going to win. He's like, but, we're 5-7 and 6-6. It's the same record. This was right after we lost to Iowa. He goes, this is the same. We're getting the same result with a different thing. And I understand that. I said, I completely understand. I said, but the only chance we have to get to a CFP team is to do what CFP teams do. And what most people do is they start trying to do it and they look around. They're like, hey, it's not really working, is it? No, it's not really working. And they quit and they give up on their dream. The dream never gives up on you. I don't care if you're an actor. I don't care if you're in sports media. I don't care if you're a football coach, football player. The dream never gives up on you, but most people give up on their dreams. And to me, it's just like when you get to that moment where it feels like, hey, is this working or not? Like just after that Iowa game, and then my D coordinator left and my D-line coach left and a bunch of guys went in the portal and it feels like, oh no, is this about to fall down? You do what Theo Epstein said when he went to Chicago, you double down. You go all in. You take all your chips and put them in the middle of the table. And you say, no, forget this. I'm not a sheep. I'm not going out like this. And you can't make the players do that. I have no problem explaining why to our players, but I can't justify. I can't be like, no, just trust me. Like they've got to buy into it. And so nothing comes easy because you know what? Ohio State is working hard. So for us to be working as hard as Ohio State, and they're already 3 levels ahead of us, we're going to be chasing them for a long time. We've got to be willing to do things that maybe they aren't. And I say that with respect to them because I know Ryan's going to do everything. But like you got to do things that are so uncomfortable to just have a chance. And when you have your chance, you can't blow it.
I've said it before, I'll say it again. Be willing to do what other people aren't so you can achieve what they won't. That is what Matt Rhule is trying to get Nebraska, the players, and everyone to buy into. And it takes time. It takes consistency over time. He said Ohio State's 3 levels above us. You could argue, hey, we were right there playing with them. Their record's significantly better, which is why he said that. And it's a fair assessment. But when you're behind and you're just doing what they do, it's going to take time. And honestly, you have to be willing to do what they aren't as hard as Ryan Day is working if you want to actually catch up. All right. So he's talking about getting players to buy in. It hasn't worked yet. The record is the same. We're doing all these things we haven't done before. It's still hard for me to say this out loud. We're tackling in practice now when we didn't used to. All right, we're doing mat drills, and there's always different variations of what mat drills may or may not be. Apparently what Rhule is doing is harder than what Frost did, okay, which aligns with pretty much what we have heard. Not a shot, just is what it is. 2 + 2 = 4. So my point is simply this. The players are kind of like, well, the record is the same. It takes time. There's a filtering out process, first and foremost. I love Bullock and Robinson and those guys and Ramir frickin' Johnson. Okay, but there's also a little bit of a filtering out process and then a starting over process and a re-education process with players. And I nothing but love and respect. Like I just listed probably my 3 favorite players on last year's team. Guys that I have talked about like a lot because I am a fan of them and I respect them. But there comes a point where it's easier to teach somebody from a blank chalkboard than to erase everything they've been learning for 2 or 3 years and start over. Does that make sense, Jake? Kind of what I'm saying? And so you kind of got to start over and then you got to build up and then you're playing catch up. When he didn't talk about 8-9 wins. Matt Rhule is all in on this year 3 job. He said CFP. If you don't know, that means college football playoff contention. That's what he is looking for. Sooner rather than later. Of course, that's what everybody's looking for. But we just made a bowl game for the first time in 15 years. So it's kind of like, oh, that's a jump and a times 3, I think. But it's not impossible. Look at Indiana. Talked about that before. My point is simply what Matt Rhule's trying to do is get people to buy into the process and understand that there is a process within the process, and then it takes time. And you've got to show up day in and day out consistently. I don't even try to bring up the word consistency, and it just comes up because it is such a huge thing. On a day like today, and everybody's got their own thing. Like, I'm like, I got to leave 10 minutes early to get into the ticket. There's going to be days when you've got to maybe do it remote or do it something like that, or something comes up, but I'm like, nope, I got to adjust my day so I can be in studio. It means something to be in studio to me. I love interacting with Jake personally. I love those things, and to each their own. Everybody's different, but there's something about consistency despite what's in front of you. I will be honest with you, and it almost worked to my detriment. I would see what everybody else was doing, and if I didn't do at least what everybody else was doing, it drove me nuts. That was just me staying on par with everybody. The workouts that we were given, no. That wasn't what I was going to do. That was the bare minimum. In my obsessive compulsive OCD player mind, the workouts that we were given, no. That's the bare minimum. Now when everybody else is done working out, I'm going to go to East Campus, which my wife knows and a few people know, not a lot of people, and then I'm going to get my advantage. Then I'm going to get my edge. That was just me. I spent a lot of time in that East Campus weight room, or at the local, not the Y, what's it called, where everybody could use the weight room.
Rec?
The rec center. I'd go over there, not as often. It was more private, more secluded at East Campus, less people. And not everybody has to be that way. That was me. And it almost worked to my detriment because I almost became OCD about certain things. And sometimes you just got to let things fall where they may. Okay, like you put in everything you can. Now just go out and leave it all on the line. So for me, it is coming back to a process over an extended period of time. You are behind to begin with as a program. You're trying to compete with teams that are ahead of you. Yes, what you're doing is harder. What you're doing is more difficult. You should expect to win games. But if you think it's going to come easy and soon and in the short term, with all due respect, it's an easy trap to fall into, but it's short-sighted. You have to be willing to do it day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year. And the people who are willing to do that, again, people who are willing to do what other people aren't will achieve what other people won't. But it's consistency over time. It's why I respect a guy like Tom Brady so much. The fire that he still had. He talked about he was more nervous for that 7th Super Bowl than he was his first Super Bowl. The one with Tampa versus the one they beat with the Rams when Bledsoe got hurt. Part of that was just he had more awareness of how big of a deal it was as an older player than he did as a younger player. But the consistency over time is crazy to me. If people want to argue that Stone Cold Steve Austin, not to go all pro wrestling on you, is the greatest of all time, cool. I'm going to go. As much as people dislike Hogan or like Hogan or whatever, it's Hogan. It's consistency over time. 80s, 90s, good guy, bad guy, faction, solo run. Nobody was ever as white hot for a short period of time as Steve Austin. Nobody. But it wasn't anywhere near as extended over time with as many variations as Hogan. I know a lot of people just tuned out because I brought up pro wrestling, but most people know those two names, which is why I brought it up. So to me, I think that's what Rhule's talking about. You've got to train guys, you got to get guys to buy in, and you've got to show up day in and day out, and you've got to be willing to embrace the journey. You've got to embrace the suck. I will never forget my rookie year. Oh my God, I was so sore and beat up in camp. They moved me inside to nose guard. I was a rookie. So I'm learning a new position. They traded away the previous year's starter. So I had no choice but to start. Of course, I wanted to. But I would take reps with the first team, the second team, and the third team because I had to be ready to go game one. I'm watching James Hall, Leroy Glover, Leonard Little, the other 3 starters. They'd be in 3 reps, they'd be out. That was not me. I'm not complaining. They had to get me ready. But I was so beat up and exhausted. Now, I remember, it's hot in St. Louis. They'd come on the radio, hey, Keep your dogs inside. It's not safe for them to be outside. We'd be outside scrimmaging. Those 3 guys had earned the right. Borderline Hall of Famer, Pro Bowler, Super Bowl champ, 10-year vet. That's the accolades of the other 3 starters. And then here comes this snot-nosed rookie learning a new position who's too light in his britches to be a nose guard, so he's got to get better sooner rather than later because we traded the previous year's starter. And we don't even know who his backup's going to be. And so I turned on Hard Knocks that year, and it was the Cowboys. And Tony Romo was talking about, because somebody asked him, if you could just zoom ahead, if you knew you could make the Super Bowl, you could just zoom ahead to the Super Bowl, would you do it? He said, no. You got to embrace the journey. You've got to embrace the suck. And I thought that was the worst thing I'd ever heard in that moment. I wanted nothing to do with that statement. Keep in mind, I was battered and it was a tough time, all right? But he was right. You've got to embrace the journey. You've got to embrace the suck. You've got to enjoy the ups. You've got to enjoy the downs. And you've got to show up the next day and the next day and the next day. You celebrate the good days. You have each other's backs through the hard times, and you show up the next day. I know that doesn't mesh with the transfer portal and the way certain things are viewed, and the transfer portal has its pluses and its minuses, okay? But that's what I take away from what Matt Rhule had to say in his clip. And I know we're running long again on this segment. I still want to play the Maddox clip because it does relate about looking to things long-term, having a long-term plan. All right, the Greg Maddox clip, and then Donovan Edwards. There are things about Nebraska that are unique. Everyone's talking about all these challenges. Well, Devaney and Osborne did it for over 40 years. Look at what Cook did. Look at what Manning's done with the wrestling program. Look at all these coaches that have done it in various ways, various sports, various types of coaches. There are unique things about Nebraska that give us an advantage. We're going to play those clips, but before we go to the break, what are your thoughts on the Rhule clip, my reaction, and then we'll head to break?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was intrigued by a few different things. One, that Matt Rhule didn't include the bowl game when he was talking about it. He said my teams went 5-7 and 6-6. So I think that somewhat gives you an idea that there is the standard or the hope that they can get to. They're focused on getting whatever it is, 9, 10, 11 wins in the regular season. And then once you get there, deal with it there. And then just the comparison to Ohio State. That's interesting too. And it might have worked in Nebraska's favor that they won the championship. So that is the team to compare to. But the fact that Nebraska maybe had these mediocre results, but was leading the national champion in the fourth quarter should tell his team, hey, we still got a long ways to go, but you guys know as well as we do, we can play with those guys.
Yeah, we had the lead with 7 minutes to go. Think about that. Think about that.